it's always much more nuanced than that. The panels, as I say, are very good, and they're looking for the quality within. And the most important thing is to own what you're putting in, own your application, have a passion for it. Don't take a project off the peg from a supervisor, develop it and own it.
Welcome to the sOOPR podcast, designed for medical trainees looking to take time out of training for a clinical research fellowship in the UK. Each week, we'll bring you a 15-minute discussion with a leading expert in the UK medical research process, or from a successful research fellow sharing what they wish they'd known before they'd taken their time out. I'm your host, Nikhil Alawalia, and on behalf of the British Junior Cardiology Association and with support from the BHF Clinical Research Collaborative, we're proud to bring you this series. Great, so I'm pleased to have with me today Professor Dave Jones, who's the Dean of the NIHR Academy. As well as this, he's an NIHR Senior Investigator and a member of their Strategy Board. He's also a Professor of Liver Immunology at Newcastle University and an Honorary Consultant Hepatologist in the Newcastle upon Tyne Hospital's NHS Foundation Trust. In recognition of his contributions, Professor Jones was also awarded an OBE for his services to liver medicine and clinical academic training. So once again, Professor Jones, really happy to have you here and sharing your wisdom with us.
Thank you. I barely recognised myself there.
So what I initially like to ask all the eminent speakers that we've had previously is to tell us a little bit about their journey into research, thinking back into their clinical training and how they first got into it.
So I first did research as a intercalating student, as a medical student. I trained in Oxford. Everyone intercalates there. I think that's interesting because I probably wouldn't have intercalated if I didn't have to. So there's an interesting thought there. I then got involved in some clinical research after I'd intercalated as I was a clinical student. I interestingly did a lot of work for somebody who then didn't put me on the paper. That taught me an important lesson about how you look after people. That was a hard lesson. I then did some research on my elective and did get a paper from it from somebody who was very good. And I got that sense of the value of doing research, the sort of pleasure of it, but also how it can go well and how it can go badly. So I started as a complete non-passionate person in research, and then it became my life, and then helping the development of the next generation of people became what I was passionate in. And all the time I've kept it real. It's about benefiting patients. It's about getting better therapies into practice. It's using science to benefit people, but most of all, it's about looking after people, be they patients or be they people embarking on this journey. So it's become a labour of love for me over a lot of years.
Yeah, great. I want to focus mainly on your work with the NIHR, but I think the first thing that you said was really interesting, that you may not have gone into research if you hadn't been almost forced into doing it from the beginning. Yes. And so I just wanted to get your opinion really on whether there's a difference in outcomes for trainees who come to research late, or those ones who always wanted to become an academic from the start, and whether you think that there's one route is better than the other, or if there's any difference in the outcomes.
So that's a really good question. So looking at it from the other end of the process, there is no difference, and there are plenty of people who went into it with a burning passion to do it. Plenty of people who almost fell into it like myself, and all shades in between. I always tell the story that my friend, when I was at university, we shared a house, and he had a burning desire to do auditory physiology. He was fascinated in how brains work. And now he's a professor of auditory neuroscience and a welcome senior fellow. But the work he's doing was a direct continuum from what he did his intercalation project. He turned our toilet into a sound laboratory. And for him, it was a burning passion. It's always been his passion. And for me, I almost feel embarrassed in comparison, because it was more transactional for me at the beginning, although it's become a passion. So I'm somebody who came late to it. I also look at my own colleagues in my own academic unit. And actually, I've got a number of really high-flying colleagues who didn't intercalate and did no research at all early on in their career, and came to it later in their higher medical training. And I think they're also very successful at it, but it's informed by real desire to improve clinical outcomes. So we need to have a system that supports people who are doing it, have always wanted to do it, and are doing it now, but at the same time recognise some people come to it later. And so one of the things we've tried to do with all the various different programs is to make sure we keep different levels of entry into the system, so that we don't have a situation that unless people intercalate, they can't end up doing research. The system is good, it allows that flexibility, but we must always protect that, because people come to it at different points in their career. And when you look at them late on, there is no difference.
Can you give us for people who may not be aware of what the NIHR does, perhaps some of its key objectives and goals?
Okay, so the NIHR is a real success story, and I'm, can say that as an outside observer and an inside observer. So it's been in place for around about 13 or 14 years, and essentially it has a very big remit around everything from translational research all the way through to policy and implementation into practice in health and social care. So in a sense, if you think of a spectrum of research funding, and perhaps BBSRC, one of the research councils, funding in very basic biological science, then through to the MRC in basic medical science, through all the way to translation, and then you perhaps into clinical trials. NIHR in a sense overlaps and then picks that up. And it actually funds things that there wasn't really a funding body that covered before the advent of NIHR. So it has really changed the landscape a lot, because it has supported the development of high quality evidence regarding health and care interventions, and then supported evidence gathering around their implementation into practice. So it has completed the spectrum of opportunity, if you like. It has grant funding components, and there are NETs and CCF. Those are components of NIHR that fund program grants or project grants, individual applications. What the Academy does is fund people in the career development space. And in essence, what we do is fund the next generation of researchers in one form or another. So our remit is capacity build in areas of health and care related science. And so we are responsible for helping nurture the next generation of people. We do it in two groups. One is we have a remit for everybody interested in healthcare science, who will then go on to maybe an MRC or a Wellcome or a Cancer Research UK PhD fellowships. The very earliest stages in careers we cover it for everybody, and then a little bit higher up the pathway as people get into the sort of doctoral and postdoctoral space and professorial, then it's very specifically in our area of applied health research and beyond. So we fund a variety of preclinical posts. So for the doctors and dentists, we have the academic clinical fellowships, the ACFs, that's a national program that everywhere in England you can apply for it. There are different variants in the other three nations. And this is for people to combine their early clinical training, be it core medical training or whatever, with early research experience. That then leads them into a PhD or an MD fellowship opportunity. Lots of funders fund those, including ourselves. And then we have the clinical lecturer scheme after a doctoral post, which allows you to do your higher specialist training, combining research and clinical training. So, and you combine the two, and there's a lot of flexibility about how you can combine the various different elements for it. And then we have a thing called the Advanced Fellowship, which is for people as a postdoctoral award, as people have started becoming independent investigators. That now can span into post-CCT, into the time when you're heading towards a consultant post. There is an important distinction between MRC, for example, and NIHR. And without getting too technical, MRC, because of its establishment and its structure, is subject to a thing called the Haldane principle, which is that funding should be based on excellence and independent of any other priorities. In a sense, there is no influence other than excellence. Now, that is absolutely correct. We fund the best quality people. However, there is a problem when you come to recent experience like COVID, where there becomes almost a national strategic need. So what have we seen in the last 15 months? Well, we've seen real challenges in social care and in public health, real challenges about vaccine development. So a system that, in a sense, sorts itself out by attracting people in areas that are attractive and then funding them, What that tends to do is to reinforce in areas which already have lots of very good people in them. So there is a counter argument that you need to have a strategic element. So the answer is you need a bit of both. Now, because of NIHR and how it's set up, it is linked to the NHS, it's Department of Health and Social Care, and we are, in a sense, a branch of government, and so aren't part of the Haldane principle with the research councils. That means that we can have a strategic look, and that is reflected in some of our priority areas. So our priority areas very much reflect areas of real need. So, for example, around health data science, there's a massive exponential increase in the power of data-driven approaches to research using real-world data, integrating very large data sets. That research opportunity is growing exponentially, but the number of people coming through in that system is growing much more slowly. So there are strategic areas of opportunity that rapidly become need. And so what we do is want to, in addition to our open funding, over 50% of our funding is always in open competition. It's by the Haldane principle. It is defined by the applicant. Attract and retain people, and it's in those areas that a lot of the doctoral, pre-doctoral support is put in, because if people aren't coming into an area for whatever reason, we need to help them, attract them in, and then also support them to be successful. So we are an interesting combination. We're both a funder that funds in open competition, but we're also a nurturing organisation because of strategic need. And it's interesting that we had identified public health, social care and health data science and emergency care as priority areas for our structures a year or so before COVID, as areas where we needed. So in a sense, you can see the challenges that are coming. And so what we've tried to do is to future gaze as much as we can. I think there is a danger. You have to balance everything you do. If you put everything into pre-doctoral, then there are no doctoral fellowships for people to go to. If you put everything into postdoctoral, there are no doctoral fellows to go into those. If you put it all into research professors, you have a group of very high-powered people, but you have no pipeline of people behind them. So there is a balance, and part of the role for people like me is to work with colleagues to get that balance right and to adjust it. And one of the things we do is every year we look at all of that and we look at the trends, and we are busy supporting. And for instance, this year we are very aware of the challenges the charities have come under because of fundraising with COVID. Very live to that. So we're going to have to pick up some of the slack around doctoral fellowships and things. So we are, in a sense, part of the health ecosystem. We play an important kind of central role in that, and we do need to adjust what we do around it and around areas of need. But there are certain areas that no one else funds that we do fund.
In terms of at the doctoral stage or the postdoctoral stage,
yeah.
Can you find people move between organizations and funders, or okay.
Yes. So so absolutely. And one of the things that we encourage people to do is to do that. So one of the things that people are often perhaps a little bit surprised at is that the working relationships in the different funders are incredibly good. So we work very closely together in order to make sure that our programs are complementary. So ACFs, for example, there are lots of people who come from an ACF in cardiology into BHF funded PhD. So we need to make sure that what we're offering fits with that. So the funders all talk to each other in some senses, and in a way from the background, say in cardiology, where you've got a very important, very effective and high profile funder, that will naturally tend to attract people into it. But we have a strong portfolio in cardiology. It's different to BHS, same as in cancer. It's very different to, the cancer portfolio in NIHR is very different to Cancer Research UK, but they are complementary. And so the big difference for why us rather than other funder, particularly later on, is around the type of science that you do. So if you're looking at implementation science, which is the science of taking a novel intervention and implementing it in practice, how the NHS systems work for that, that's very much our core territory. So my advice for people is consider all the funders that may be relevant for your work, okay? And, for somebody working in cancer research, looking at translating a new therapy into practice. That could be NIHR, that could be MRC, could be Cancer Research UK, could be Wellcome Trust. Think about all of the funders, but make sure you ultimately go to the funder that's most suited to the type of science you want to do. And if in doubt, talk to the program manager. So my colleagues in the Academy are great. They are in all the funders, and they're really happy to have a chat to you. So just drop them an email, organize a chat, and tell them what you're thinking of doing, and they will give you honest advice, and take that advice, because these guys know it inside out. If there is any query about it all, if they don't know the answer, it gets bounced up to somebody like me or my equivalents in the funders. So before you embark on writing a long application, ask people. They're there to help. So really do access that. And if they say it's the wrong kind of science for our remit, take that on board, because they're not second guessing the panel, but they sit in all the panel discussions, so they know the way that panels think. And if it's a nuanced thing, they will get somebody to look at it, but don't send it to the wrong funder.
Say that you've started your PhD research, and 6 months in you realize that you confirm that you really like it, and that is something you want to do. What would you practically advise that fellow to do, and at what stage do you think that they should start exploring that idea, and how should they go about doing it?
Okay. So, as I said, not everybody who does a ACF or a PhD or whatever, not everybody wants to become an academic. We would like to think that everyone finds it a successful experience, so people will learn something from it. And there are plenty of people who go on to very successful careers, but not as academics, perhaps in the NHS or in other structures. So the first thing to do is, if this isn't for you, is finish it. It's better for you to do that. And nobody is going to criticize you for that. Remember what I said about being happy is really key, and we are supporting people to be successful. A PhD student of mine really loved lab science, but didn't want to be a postdoc and go down the academic thing. She had been very successful. She is now probably earning more than everybody I've ever supervised put together as a patent attorney in America, and loves what she does. Every single working day she uses her science knowledge, but just not in an academic setting. So if you don't like this, if this is not for you, don't worry about it, is the first thing. If this is really for you, then I think the two things I would suggest, the first is let people know, okay? The first is let people know. So let your supervisors know, all universities have progress review and things like that, tell people. The second is, if you really think you're going to follow this, then use the time and the opportunity you've got tactically, if you like. So the most important tactic doing a PhD is to get your PhD, obviously, and don't buy into the mythology about how impossibly difficult PhD vivas are. That's part of my urban mythology. They're not. That you need to prepare for it, you need to do good science, but you'll actually find it as a very enjoyable experience. Most people do. Talking to people who are interested in what you've done, about what you spent time doing, it actually should be fun. So you need to get your PhD. You also need to get your papers, of course you do, although there is no fixed tariff from it. If you are going to do this, then, the one thing I would suggest you do is you start to think about the next stage whilst you're still doing research time. So you can start to have conversations with people about future directions. And if you are a medic, then I would absolutely point you in the direction of a CL, a clinical lectureship. This gives you time to complete your clinical training, but also to develop your research ideas. So it gives you 50% research time. The Academy of Medical Sciences do a lecturer's grant, which is a £30,000 grant to get you started on your research. Those are real badges of esteem. Seriously think about those. And begin to think about something that I call the evolution. But you want to do something which has evolved out from your PhD. So it's neither a completely different thing, totally different, nor is it a rehash of what you've done before.
I think what would be really interesting to hear would be what your experience has been of the fellows who really shine and do really well during their research. What do you think it is about them or their work that really makes them stand out?
Oh, again, a really good question. So the really successful ones are are the ones who own it. Goes back to what I said before, this ownership. That one of my colleagues, who's an absolute star, he's an oral surgeon, and when his area is chronic facial pain, okay, which is a very difficult area, difficult patients, a very difficult area. And yet when he talks about it, his eyes light up, and he has a unique clinical service, and he has got all manner of interventions, and something that most people think is an incredibly difficult area to go into, he brings a passion to it. So passion backed up with substance is absolutely the key to all of this. The second thing is this resilience thing, and that's in twofold. One is that you will get short-term knockbacks, papers will be rejected, you'll go home, kick the waste paper bin, grants get rejected, kick the filing. My filing cabinet actually has a dent in the side where I kicked it once. So that will happen, and you need to kind of ride that. The greater level of resilience is the realization that genuinely innovative people sometimes don't get recognized in the system. So when I sit down and I brief our panels, I am interested in the person, okay? It's for our panels, it's person, place, project in that order, okay, in terms of priority. A person, the capacity of that organization to commit to and develop that person, and then the project as a vehicle. And we are looking for, inner sensibility rather than polish, rather than people who are well prepped. We're looking for the inner quality, and we work really hard on the panels to do that. So my last comment was going to be, my big observation is just do it. If you are interested enough to be listening to this and be thinking about it, then do it. And I'm very fortunate in what I've done, that I've never regretted for a second what I've done, and the ability to go beyond what you can do as a clinician. We reach the end of the current guidelines, don't we? And the frustration we feel about the limitations of that. The academic life allows you to be able to go beyond with all of that. So sometimes people say, why do you do research? I thought you wanted to be a clinician. I'm a total clinician. Everything I do is aimed at patients. It's just, it goes beyond the limitations of what we currently do. And the other thing, which many of the people listening to this are going to be younger at the beginning of their careers, it is important to think about sustaining a career over a long period of time. It is important to do that. And to do that, most of all, you need to be interested and passionate and care about what you do. And actually, what I see around me are lots of very engaged academics, in mine and other fields, for whom that innovation opportunity and the constant evolution of it is what keeps them young in it all. So whatever you do in life, you have to sustain your career, and that needs you to have something that is precious to you, and to hold on to that. So if you're thinking about it, dip a toe in the water. And remember, if you do an MD or a PhD, that doesn't commit you, that just gives you a better CV for the next stage in your career. So you're not making any irrevocable decisions. You are not, it's not one track or the other. What you're doing is actually keeping your options open.
And we'll put references to everything you referred to, and then the website in the show notes for this. And of course, if any trainees want to reach out to the Academy, they can always.
Yes, absolutely.
Next time on the podcast.
Unless you take the PPI all the way through on your research journey through to the funding application, you will not get the funding, because funders are really focused.
So for today's episode, we're going to be looking at patient and public involvement, otherwise known as PPI. This is defined as research carried out with or by members of the public rather than to or for or about them. It's shown to improve the quality and impact of research, and so working in partnership has now become a prerequisite in health service research work in the UK. So for that reason, I'm very pleased to have Ms. Sarah Murray, who's chair of the British Heart Foundation and James Lind Alliance Public and Patient Initiative for the Priority Setting Partnership. She's also the chair of the NIHR Patient Representative Group and the lay representative on the Executive Society for Cardiothoracic Surgery. She's also a qualified solicitor in addition to her background. So thanks so much for taking the time to join us today, and I'm sure we're going to learn a lot.